did, and so did Hertz. You assume a material ether, which everybody did when they first started the theory. Even Maxwell believed in a material. It hasn't made it into theory. That was one statement that he made. One of his primary
phrase, some of Maxwell's work, narrowing it for our purposes in terms of how it is applied to the energy from the vacuum work that we'll be addressing overall.
Yes, Maxwell had one vision, and what he thought was the primary reality in electrodynamics was the potentials. Heaviside and the others thought the potentials were mysticism. They weren't even real. If it was not force, it had no reality in the physical world. It's all right. Most scientists thought that. So he thought that these were just mathematical niceties that Maxwell played around with. So one of his real jobs, he said, these things ought to be murdered from the theory. That was one statement that he made. One of his primary reasons was to get rid of the potentials, and he got rid of all of them but two.
Heaviside.
Heaviside did, and so did Hertz doing the same thing, and so did Gibbs doing the same thing in forming vector algebra and vector electromagnetics. The equations, for example, that are taught today at universities, Maxwell's equations, are not Maxwell's equations at all. They are Heaviside's truncated equations. But anyway, Heaviside took the view that, these potentials are mystical, we've got to murder them from the theory, and we've got to get rid of them, and so they did. Oddly, in today's modern physics, we know the potentials are what's real, and the force field is an effect made in matter after something much more fundamental interacts with the matter. It hasn't made it into electrical engineering yet in 50 years since we've known it. Maybe it will one of these days migrate from the physics department across the campus to the building where the electrical engineering department is and get them to change the thing.
Right.
When you assume force fields in space, you assume a material ether, which everybody did when they first started the theory. Even Maxwell believed in a material ether.
How would you define that?
Material ether is that there's a thin gas, a thin material gas filling all space. And there's not a point in the universe where mass is absent. That's called the luminiferous ether. It was destroyed in 1887 by the Michelson-Morley experiments. All the electrical equations all assumed this material ether, and still do. They never changed a single equation. What they did one day is they got up and announced, well, there's no material ether, so we're not using one. And they kept right on with the same equations, all assuming the material ether. What you do in a case like that, it does not allow you to engineer force. You have to start with force. You're automatically into what we call entropic engineering. You've beaten nature in a wrestling match with nature. You're fighting forces all the time. You don't have to do it that way. If you just flow the energy in freely and transfer it and shape and form the energy as you wish, and then interact that with matter, you form powerful forces without ever having to wrestle nature. And that's the way to do engineering. That's negative entropy engineering, which will be the engineering of the future if we ever get it born. Anyway, Maxwell's equations still had a much greater variety of things that you can do electromagnetically than our people can do today at the universities.